No, it's being recorded. Great. I know that this is a Romanov enthusiast magazine or lecture series, so I want to, as I say, start out by explaining a little bit about how I discovered Alexandra and her connection to the Romanovs, and then we will go into her life story. So I thought, so let's start. People always ask me, how did I discover Alexandra? And the honest answer is I was looking for a coat. I really needed a new winter coat, and I quite liked the 1940s style. So I did what anyone does, and I went onto Pinterest and I started clicking around and looking at all these different vintage photos. And I came across this photo of a very pretty girl taken from the 1940s. And it said underneath that her name was Princess Alexandra of Greece and Denmark. And I vaguely knew about the Greek royal family from obviously Prince Philip. So I looked up how they might be related. And as I found out, they are second cousins paternally, but they were also related maternally through their connection to Queen Victoria. And I thought, well, that's an interesting fact of history. I don't really know about that, but I sort of put that to one side and carried on trying to find a coat. So for those who don't know, my background is actually in fine jewellery. I've been working with fine jewellery since I was 16, and one of the things that I love to study is tiaras. Now, I studied Russian history when I was at school, and that carried on into my jewelry career. And as we all know, some of the best tiaras came from Russia and were purchased by the Romanovs. Now, this particular emerald and diamond tiara that we're seeing now was owned by Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna, who, of course, was commonly known as Grand Duchess Ella, granddaughter of Queen Victoria and sister to the last Tsarina, Queen Alexandra. Tsarina Alexandra. There are a lot of Alexandras. So Grand Duchess Ella received these emeralds when she married Grand Duke Serge, and they are thought to come from the imperial treasury. They were said to be a gift to Ella from Serge's mother, Maria Alexandrovna. Initially, Ella wore them very conventionally. She pinned them to her Russian kokoshnik fabric headdress. Obviously, she wore the necklace and the brooches. But like so many of the Grand Duchesses, eventually she made them into a more solid tiara that we see still to this day, made from gold and silver gilt. Sadly, Grand Duke Serge was assassinated in 1905, and in order to fund her religious order and her convent, Ella sold a lot of her jewelry. However, these particular emeralds were not sold. They were actually given to her niece / adopted daughter, the Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, known as Maria Pavlovna the Younger, so that she wouldn't be confused with the Grand Duchess Vladimir. Now, interestingly, as I was doing this presentation, I realized another connection to my Alexandra, because the reason that Maria Pavlovna became the adopted daughter of Ella and her husband was because her mother died giving birth to her brother. And her mother, of course, was the first Princess Alexandra of Greece and Denmark. She was the daughter of King George I and Queen Olga, who was also a Grand Duchess. And as you can see, she married Grand Duke Paul, whose brother was Grand Duke Serge, married to Ella. And tragically, she died giving birth to Dmitri. So her jewelry ended up going to Paul's second wife. So she did manage to retain her mother's sapphires, but Ella very generously gave Maria Pavlovna these her diamond and emerald kokoshnik and the accompanying jewels. Now, Maria Pavlovna was actually one of the lucky ones. She managed to escape the revolution in 1917, and she took her emeralds with her to Paris. And like a lot of the Russian emigre at the time, she set up an embroidery business. And the legend has it that in 1922, in order to fulfill an order for the famous designer Coco Chanel, Maria Pavlovna finally decided to sell these emeralds. Luckily for history, she sold them to King Alexander of Yugoslavia. And again, in doing these slides, I realized that King Alexander also had ties to the Romanovs and the Russian court.
Jesus Christ.
King Alexander's mother was a Montenegrin princess, and his maternal aunts were the infamous Militia and Anastasia, who unfortunately were the two responsible for introducing Rasputin to Tsarina Alexandra. Alexander himself, King Alexander, spent time in the Russian military academies when he was younger for his training. And there is a story that he was unofficially engaged to the Grand Duchess Tatiana. As we all know, tragically, she died along with the rest of the royal family in Ekaterinburg in 1918. Alexander was supposedly heartbroken over this, but you know, royal matches are rarely made for sentimental reasons, and he was still in need of a wife to continue his dynasty. So the emeralds he purchased from Maria Pavlovna in 1922 were for his new bride, Princess Marie of Romania. Now, Marie was also part Romanov. She was the daughter of Maria of Romania. Marie, of course, was the daughter of Maria Alexandrovna, the only daughter of Tsar Alexander II. And the young Princess Marie was also descended from Queen Victoria via her father, who was Alfred, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Marie was very fond of her new emeralds. She obviously wore them on her wedding day, but she also wore them to her mother's coronation that same year in 1922. And as you can see, Marie is wearing her emeralds, and her mother is also wearing the Grand Duchess Vladimir's sapphire tiara that she bought from her sister after the revolution. Now, it was felt by 1922 that the emerald necklace, Ella's original emerald necklace, was becoming somewhat unfashionable. So the new Queen Marie of Yugoslavia sent this emerald necklace to the French jewelers Cartier, and they created a very imposing diamond and emerald sautoir, which is a name given to very long necklaces, fancy necklaces made from precious stones in the 1920s style. And these, combined with the original Russian tiara, became the de facto Yugoslavian crown jewels. Now, tragically, in 1934, her husband, King Alexander, was assassinated in Marseille. It's infamously is the first assassination to be caught on film. And the throne was left to their 11-year-old son, Peter, who became King Peter II. Obviously, at 11 years old, he was too young to rule, so a regent was put in place, and that regent was Prince Paul, who was a first cousin of King Alexander. Now, Paul also had links to Russia. His mother was part of the Demidov family, who made their fortune within the mining industry in the Urals, and they were considered nobility. His wife was Princess Olga of Yugoslavia, who, of course, was not only a granddaughter of Grand Duchess Vladimir, but also a granddaughter of Queen Olga. And she is also second cousins to my Alexandra and sister to the famous Marina, Duchess of Kent. Now, poor King Peter, we will get into his life a little bit later on in the presentation, but he came into his majority at 17 after a coup against Prince Paul, and 1 week before the Nazi invasion of Yugoslavia, so didn't have the best timing. He managed to flee to London, like many of the other monarchies did. And who should he meet at a ball at Grosvenor House in 1942? It was the pretty girl in the coat from my Pinterest searches, Princess Alexandra. So that is how the many threads of my research came together. They got married, and Alexandra was able to wear the Romanov emerald only once at the wedding ball in 1947 of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. And then they had to be sold, but we will come on to that later. So after threading all these threads together, I decided to research this woman properly because I was fascinated. I said, okay, well, I did what anyone done, and I went to Wikipedia, and it was quite a sparse entry. It had sort of began with her parents' unequal marriage, and her father had a strange death, and then she got married to King Peter, and there was lots of problems, and it was very sparse after the 1960s. But crucially, it said that she wrote 2 books. It said that she wrote her autobiography in 1955, and then she wrote another biography on her cousin Prince Philip in 1959. And it said that this particular biography was the reason that she was ostracized by the British royal family. So being nosy and liking a bit of gossip, I thought I'd read the Prince Philip book to see what she had said that was so awful. There's absolutely nothing in there scandalous whatsoever. There was mention of a teenage romance in Venice, and that was literally about it. So I thought, okay, well then let me read her book. And I emphasize this in my own book. As I was reading it, I was just absolutely blown away, because this is an autobiography written by a queen, and it was written in 1955, and she holds absolutely nothing back. She talks about her father's death and her parents' marriage. She talks about her eating disorder at 13, and then the opposition to her own marriage when she finally does meet Peter. After the fall of the monarchy, she describes them going bankrupt. She describes her husband's infidelity. And this all culminated at the end of her book with her really sort of poignant description of her first suicide attempt. And I found it so moving, and it really affected me. But you get to the end of the book and it ends on a happy ending. But I realized that didn't correlate with the Wikipedia entry that I had read. So I thought, right, well, I'll have to research further. And that was the catalyst for me writing my own book on Alexandra. Where are we? 32. So Alexandra, the lost queen, who was she? Her royal side obviously comes from her father. Her father was descended from the Romanovs via Queen Olga of Greece. She herself was a granddaughter of Tsar Nicholas I. He was also descended on his mother's side from Queen Victoria through her daughter Vicky, the Empress of Prussia. And Alexandra's life in many ways was hampered by her parents' marriage. King Alexander came to the throne during a very turbulent time during the Greek monarchy. He actually was the second son, and he was his father and his eldest brother had been deposed in 1917. Now, in 1915, he met Aspasia, who was the daughter of the master of the horse to King Constantine I. So she was a member of the court, and her family was very prominent. They were part of what was known as the Fahrenheit. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Fahrenheit class, which was like a diplomatic family during the Byzantine and Ottoman empires. So she came from a prominent family, but because of the Greek family's origins in Denmark, in Germany, they didn't recognize morganatic unions. However, Alexander, being the second son, didn't think he was going to inherit. So, he saw no problem with falling in love with this Greek girl, this beautiful Greek girl. But as I say, his father was deposed, as was his, they didn't want his eldest brother as next in line, so they chose Alexander, and he was essentially a puppet king from 1917 to 1920. They did manage to get married. It was in secret, and it caused an uproar with the family in exile, with the junta that taken over Greece at the time. But it was felt that, I mean, Alexander definitely felt that it would all come right again and his dad would come back to the throne and that they could go and live happily ever after somewhere. As I said, they got married in secret, and then Aspasia became pregnant in 1920. And the future was supposed to be happy, but poor Alexander, in probably what can only be described as one of the most bizarre royal deaths in history, was walking in the palace gardens one day and he was bitten by a monkey. And this was 3 years before penicillin was invented, and sepsis set in. And after 3 weeks of agonizing pain and delirium, he died. He died at 27. And I always like to show this picture to people because Aspasia later on in life was accused of being very pushy, and a lot of the family didn't like her, and she didn't have a great reputation. But I look at this picture and I just see a 25-year-old woman who's 6 months pregnant, and she had to wait 5 years to marry the man that she loved. And just when they were about to be happy, this awful tragedy happens, and because there was no penicillin, he had to have 11 operations on the wound, and he couldn't have anesthetic for I think like 9 out of 11 of them because his heart was too weak. So she was having to hold his head while he was dying in pain, and then she was sort of airbrushed from these pictures. So I always try and include this because I think it explains a lot of her later behavior. So poor Aspasia, as I say, she was 6 months pregnant. There was no king. They had to recall Queen Olga from exile while there was elections called, and there was a referendum on whether a monarchy would be restored in Greece. However, Aspasia did pose a problem because if she was pregnant with a boy, then it was feared that the opposition would keep King Constantine out and just have Queen Olga as the regent and have the supposed male child raised to be the next king. They did come back though, the royal family, and as I said, they didn't view Aspasia as an equal wife. They viewed it as morganatic, so she was somewhat shunned by the rest of the family. However, one person who did show Aspasia kindness was Prince Philip's mother, Princess Alice. She stayed with Aspasia and she made sure she was okay all through the pregnancy, and she really took care of it. And later on, Aspasia repaid the kindness on the night that Alice's husband was taken away by the military court. However, none of the intrigue mattered, because on the 25th of March 1921, which was strangely the day that Greece celebrates its independence from the Ottoman Empire, the only Greek princess with Greek blood was born, and Aspasia named her after her father, and that's Alexandra there as a baby. And there she is with Queen Sophie, her beloved grandmother. Queen Sophie definitely softened towards Aspasia and to Alexandra, and she became her champion when she was a little girl. Again, even as the child of a king, she wasn't recognized as a princess, and it wasn't until 1922, after the death of King Constantine, because I feel he would have stood in the way, that Aspasia and Alexandra became their royal highnesses, princesses of Greece and Denmark. So Alexandra's early years were spent in Greece. She was very close with her cousin. Prince Philip was only 3 months younger than her, and her other cousin, the young King Michael there of Romania, was the son of Alexandra's father's sister, Princess Helen, known as Sita. But once again, there was a second Greek revolution in 1924, and Aspasia and Alexandra left Greece, and they began their lives as exiles. They initially lived in Florence with Queen Sophie, and then they moved to Rome, where Aspasia had relatives. And then they moved to England to live with the Horlicks family, as they were great friends of King Alexander and Aspasia. And as money was quite tight, Aspasia only had a small pension from the Greek government, and I think she was left some inheritances by certain family members. Alexandra couldn't be educated at home with governesses, as was the standard practice for princesses at the time. So Aspasia took the very modern approach, and she sent Alexandra, she was one of the first princesses to receive an education in a boarding school. So Alexandra was first sent to Westfield, and then she graduated to the senior school called Heathfield. Now, sadly, Alexandra was a complete disaster. She suffered with intense loneliness. She couldn't read and write at the age of 8, but luckily she spoke English. And yes, as I say, she suffered great emotional distress. And eventually this culminated in her refusing to eat. She actually developed an eating disorder that would plague her throughout the rest of her life. But she did recover. Aspasia finally saw the state that her daughter was in, and she took her to Switzerland. And so she spent the latter half of the 1930s, as most young princesses did. She went to finishing school in Paris, and she had her debutante ball, which was very well attended. And it was actually the Duke of Windsor, after the abdication, who was the guest of honor, and was the first one to have his first dance, have Alexandra's first dance with. Now, in 1939, eventually war came to Europe. So Aspasia and Alexandra were initially in Italy, but then they returned to Greece with the other royals. In 1941, they had to flee the Nazi invasion. They were initially in Egypt, in Cairo. They went to South Africa, but they felt that there would be more of use if they went to London. And that's where they spent the remainder of the war. And as you can see from the middle picture, they reconnected with Alexandra's second cousin, Princess Marina, who was at that time the Duchess of Kent. And Alexandra found her to be a great role model, and she wanted to get into nursing by following Marina's example. And so, Alexandra was, as a princess, invited to all the diplomatic receptions at the time, and obviously London was awash with important meetings taking place. And then the most important one for Alexandra was the ball between the Greek and the Yugoslavians at Grosvenor House in 1942. And that is where she met the young King Peter. Initially, she wasn't very impressed by him, but as the weeks went on, she fell madly in love. And it was a whirlwind courtship, and after only 7 weeks, they were engaged. This wasn't uncommon during the war. A lot of people felt, they could be dead tomorrow. But after 7 weeks, Peter proposed and Alexandra said yes. However, they would not marry for another 2 years. And this was partly due to the war, but also partly due to immense opposition, and a lot of it unbeknownst to Alexandra and Peter. It came from his mother, Queen Marie. It came from Churchill. It came from King George VI, who was King Peter's godfather. But I won't go too deep into it. It is all in the books. But I found a lot of information in the National Archives in Kew in London that really shone a light onto the opposition that these two just were not aware of. They did eventually get married, though. After 2 years, they got married in 1944. And famously, there were 3 kings at the wedding. As you can see, there is King George, King Harald of Norway, King George of Greece, and 2 queens. There is Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So it was a very well-attended event. Peter's mother refused to come. She said she had a toothache. And they initially were very, very happy. And only a year later, their son, Crown Prince Alexander, was born famously in Claridge's Hotel, which the legend says Churchill had made Suite 212, Yugoslavian territory, for the day so that he could be born on quote-unquote home soil. But just as she was supposed to get her happily ever after, everything changed. Again, it's a complicated story, but effectively by November 1945, the communists took over Yugoslavia, seized all of Peter and his family's properties, and banned them from the country. So they couldn't return, and they had to make a new life for themselves. They drifted around Europe, mainly staying in Switzerland and Paris. Peter became very depressed and very restless. And it was luckily for them in 1947 when they received an invitation to Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth's wedding that they were able to be royal again just for a few days. And it was here, just outside Claridge's, that Alexandra was pictured for the one and only time wearing the full regalia, sash, dress, tiara of the Queen of Yugoslavia. Now, they did attend the wedding. They can be seen in certain photos and certain newsreels, but for anyone who knows me, knows that I will forever curse Edwina Mountbatten and that stupid hat she's got on, because it blocks Alexandra when she should be in the lineup. And I've tried very hard through several sites to find, any other angles, but I can't seem to find one. So she is there, I do promise. I've seen the film footage, but again, she's hidden. And so it was after these monumental royal events that the couple were still deciding how to live their lives, and return to Yugoslavia was still out of the question. So in 1948, they made their first trip to America. It was a unofficial royal tour created by Peter's advisors. It was felt that there was a large Yugoslav population there who were very anti-communist, so they still viewed Peter as their head of state, and that would have been a great comfort to Peter, who obviously was losing more and more focus of the direction of his life. And it was also felt that by going to America, they could maybe find a new purpose, maybe invest in businesses, and see if that's where their lives could take them. And it was a great success, so much so that they went back again the next year. Peter had invested all of their capital in 2 businesses. And his logic was that if one of the businesses failed, then the other one would prop them up. But again, with the worst luck in the world, both of the businesses went under. And this was when, tragically, Alexandra had to sell, they both had to sell the famous Romanov emeralds. Now, luckily, the tiara still exists. It's owned by the jewelers Van Cleef & Arpels, but they removed the emerald stones and they replaced them with paste. But Queen Marie's impressive sautoir necklace was completely dismantled and broken up into lesser jewels. So they were financially ruined and they had to go back to Europe. But while they were there, Peter took on another role in America. Alexandra never said the exact specifics of what the role was, but it's been suggested that it had something to do with diplomatic work, possibly to help the Americans in the Cold War. It was on this trip on the way to America that Peter confessed to Alexandra that he had actually met another woman. And he wasn't sure if he was in love with her or what was going on, but he was obviously in a great state of turmoil when this happened. He wasn't sure if he was going to continue with this marriage. Now, unfortunately, Alexandra had developed a very unhealthy obsession, fixation with her husband. She loved him, I would, in a very unhealthy way. So when he confessed this to her, she completely spiraled. She went and got herself photographed for Vogue. She started spending lavishly on parties and on new dresses, trying to get his attention, but it all just resulted in more and more rows. So in 1950, she couldn't take it anymore. She went back to Europe with Crown Prince Alexander. But Peter didn't come back to her. He visited briefly, saying that he had to go to work with his politicians and that she was to go and spend time with her mother in Venice. And it was here that she had another breakdown. She stopped eating and it ended up with her in a coma. And then she was put onto sedatives to handle her psychological depression. She tried again to reunite with Peter in Paris a few months later, but he didn't come. He stood her up and he actually tried to get their son taken away from her. They did eventually reconcile, but it was only after Alexandra chose to completely compromise and just follow Peter on whatever mission he was on, trying to regain his throne or to earn a living. They did try again with America, but they couldn't economize and they got themselves into more debt, trying to keep up appearances, trying to maintain a royal facade, but it just never seemed to work out. Crucially, they were back in Europe in 1952 when George VI died, and they were invited to the funeral and they did go to his lying in state. But this actually marked the end of an era between the Yugoslavs and the British royal family. Poor King Peter, George VI was something of a father figure to him. He was very supportive during World War II, and his death dealt a devastating blow. But again, the same old pattern re-emerged. They started to drift around Europe. They made no plans to buy a home, which is something Alexandra always wanted. As you can see from this picture, this was taken at New Year's Eve with the Aga Khan in Cannes, and there was just no planning and no plans for the future or to set up any sort of stability. When they got back to Paris, the hotel that they were staying in wouldn't admit them, because it turned out that Peter hadn't been paying the bills, and this led to more and more rows between the couple, and this culminated in them barely speaking. But by 1953, they were invited to the Parisian club Maxime's for the screening of Queen Elizabeth's coronation, which was going to take place in the club. And Alexandra found it extremely poignant and sad watching her cousin Philip when he knelt to his wife, Queen Elizabeth. And she reflected in her autobiography, "We were great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria of England. To Elizabeth and Philip had come a crown to serve, glorious in its traditions of greatness and strength, and in the unity of the British peoples. To Peter and me had come an inheritance of crowned uncertainty, established through bloodshed, violence, and intrigue, and similarly lost." And it was after this event that Peter abandoned her fully and went to Spain, and it all came to a head. Alexandra had to stay with friends at a hotel, and she was tracked down by the bailiffs. And just as with their previous hotels, Peter hadn't been paying any of the bills, and as he had left the country, they had now caught up with Alexandra, and her possessions became impounded. And the only way she could get out of it was to declare bankruptcy and let the world know that her husband had abandoned her. And so there's just a quick family tree to show how they were all related via Queen Victoria. So, yeah, poor Alexandra, bankrupt and abandoned. Peter went to Spain and started to demand a divorce. And she tried everything for a number of months. She tried to reconcile with him. She tried to get her aunt, Queen Frederica, and her uncle, King Paul, to speak with Peter, but he wouldn't budge. And that was the final straw for her. And as I say, in 1953, she tragically slashed her wrists because that was her breaking point. And luckily she was saved. Luckily, Queen Federica came to her rescue, had her wrists bandaged, but Peter still insisted on the divorce. And these pictures here are Alexandra outside the court with the marks of what had happened. The divorce was actually dropped, but only on a technicality, because Peter he was claiming not to have residency in France at the time. But that was no comfort to Alexandra, because she was still estranged from him, and he wouldn't return to her. So she spent the next 2 years separated from Peter. She tried to find meaning with her life. She tried to reconnect with her son, who she'd barely seen. She went to stay in Rome with her cousins, as you can see in the picture on the left. Peter, in the meantime, published his own memoirs, King's Heritage. And he had taken to blaming Alexandra for all their financial ruin, saying that, she'd spent all his money on dresses and shoes, and actually she was a bad queen and he shouldn't have married her in the first place, and it was only a marriage of state. But I've seen the paperwork, and it really wasn't. Now, so by 1955, they had got back to an amicable sort of setting. They were very good at sharing custody of Crown Prince Alexander, and it was agreed that he would be educated in Switzerland. And so poor Alexander was being teased by the other boys at school about his parents. So he wrote to his father. He wrote to his father a very sweet note asking for a reunion at Christmas. And Alexandra finally got her wish. In 1955, her husband returned to her, and they had a lovely Christmas Day reunion. It's like something out of a Disney film, in the snow with a sledge or a sleigh. That's more romantic. And the future did seem bright. They seemed happy. They held a press conference that they were back together. And Peter promised her that he was sorting out his finances, and he was going to use the money from his book, and that it was all going to be okay in the future. In 1955, they returned to London, and they had a meeting with Churchill. And again, it's quite complicated to go into, but Peter and Churchill during the war did have a close relationship. That Churchill did manipulate Peter. Anyway, we won't go into it. But he went to Churchill in 1955 and asked for help with speaking to Tito about getting some of his personal property back, if he could help with his tax problems, if he could maybe find him a job with the finance firms in the city of London. But it never came to anything, unfortunately. So they still needed money. And as Peter had done, Alexandra released her own memoirs in 1955. And as I said in the beginning, it was a groundbreaking book. 1955, you think a generation earlier, poor Princess Alice had been confined to a sanatorium for her mental health problems. And the Bowes-Lyons nieces were just covered up and pronounced dead because of their problems. And here we are with a queen, a beautiful young queen, telling the world all of her problems. And it was groundbreaking for the time. Now, they had managed to create some stability in their life. They actually moved to the Riviera, to Cannes, and they lived very modestly in a small house, and they had just a few members of staff. But interestingly, while they were on the Riviera, they were one of the few royals to attend the wedding of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier of Monaco. As we know, it was somewhat shunned by a lot of the royals of Europe for its celebrity nature. But Alexandra and Peter went, and they had a very, if not close, a very friendly relationship with the Grimaldis. They they were given rooms at the Hotel de Paris to stay in, and Rainier very generously granted Peter the right to have a chancellery, a royal Yugoslav chancellery in Monte Carlo, which meant that they could still have passports from the Yugoslav nationality, because when Tito kicked them out of the country, he took away the nationality as well. By 1959, the financial situation still wasn't fantastic, so Alexandra wrote her infamous, quote-unquote, book on Prince Philip. As I say, if you ever read it, it's, if nothing else, an absolutely glowing book on Prince Philip. She can't go into enough details about how clever and brave and handsome he is, which I've always thought might have been a dig at her own husband. But in doing so, she was ostracized from the British royal family, and so was Peter, but that could have, yeah. And that was it. There was, never any sort of, no meeting up for tea after that. But to their credit, the British royals did keep in good contact with Crown Prince Alexander, and he's often spoken about remembering the Queen, because the Queen is his godmother, spending time with her very fondly. Now, here is where the story is going to get dicey. So I have to be, there's very many different angles to the next part of the story, and they are all important. So by the 1960s, Peter became involved with this separatist group within the Serbian church. They were known as the Schismatics. And they basically felt that the main branch of the church was being influenced by the communists in Belgrade, which it wasn't, of course. But they really embraced Peter. They got him to join this movement, and they really sort of, played on his insecurities, played on his need for a purpose, stroked his ego. They would send him on tours, and they probably provided him with funds, and it made him, feel like a king again, which is something that he just always wanted. Now, in 1963, we don't know the precise details, because again, Alexandra didn't write anything after her book on Prince Philip. So this part of the story was all pieced together via newspapers and other people's memoirs. So we don't know the precise reason for what happened next, but Crown Prince Alexander and Alexandra were staying in Venice with Aspasia. Crown Prince Alexander goes out for the evening with friends, and he comes home and he can't get in, and he's knocking on the door, and he has to jump over a fence and climb through a window. And, the poor boy goes into the living room and he finds his mother collapsed on the living room floor with an empty bottle of sleeping pills next to her. She'd taken 16 Nebutols, which are incredibly powerful sleeping pills. And so she tried to commit suicide once again. She was taken to hospital, and she was in a coma. And obviously, as any overdose, it had terrible physical and mental repercussions on her. But she did recover. She did wake up. Again, she didn't give the real reason for her attempt. She just said that she was extremely depressed. And sadly, after that, she was a changed woman. She was pretty much just a ghost. She never wrote anything again, and she's barely mentioned in the newspapers. She was photographed in 1964 in her mother's garden in Venice, and I think, as you can see from these pictures, she was not a well woman. So, yeah, as the 60s went on, Peter was still involved with this church. They were still sending him on tours. Initially, she wasn't obviously well enough to join him. She did join him on some. There she is in 1969 in New York with him. But there was, as I say, she was barely mentioned in the press, but there was one article that I found that mentioned her, and it said that her life was, she'd go for a walk and wait for him to come home. And actually, her friends mentioned that if you caught her, you could see that she was miles away. Now, we get to 1970, and this is where it's going to get really, really confusing and really murky. So I do apologize. I'm going to try and give both sides of the story. But even in my book, I've had to put a disclaimer on this chapter because it's really difficult to know what the actual version of events were. So 1970, Peter, he'd been a heavy drinker for a number of years, and it turned out that he was also a diabetic because he'd collapsed at dinner with his brother Tomislav and his wife Margarita, who was a nurse, and managed to revive him at the time. But heavy drinking and diabetes, as you can imagine, is a lethal combination. And it got to the point where his health was so bad that he was admitted to a hospital in LA. And the person that contacted his family was a member of this separatist movement, and it's a woman by the name of Mitzi Lowe. Now, Mitzi Lowe is somewhat infamous, controversial character within this story. She went on to marry Peter's youngest brother, Prince Andre, and she became very reclusive in her old age. And she gave one interview to a Serbian journalist in 2003, and it's available on YouTube. It's in Serbian, but I do have a copy with English subtitles if anyone wants to watch it. But so her version of events vastly differ from the family's version of events. So I'm going to try and give both sides. So as I say, Peter's health is so bad that he's now in a hospital in LA. Mitzi contacts Prince Tomislav, who is Peter's second youngest brother, pictured here with Crown Prince Alexander. Mitzi tells Tomislav, he's not well. I think you're going to have to come over. It's looking serious. They go over. There's a lot of intrigue going on because they're trying to recruit Tomislav and Alexander into their separatist movement, and they're not having it. They do manage to go and visit Peter in hospital, and Tomislav in his memoirs, he's just like, my brother, he was in such a bad way. His hair was falling out and he was just really dilapidated. But the doctors promised him that he was on the mend. So Tomislav and Alexander went back to London while Peter recovered in hospital. While this was going on, I can find no mention of Alexandra anywhere. It was reported that she was ill at the time, which given her history isn't surprising. She is supposed to have been with Peter in the January of 1970. But again, while this major health crisis is going on, she's not by her husband's side. Now, we get to June 1970. Peter is still alive, but he needs his medical bills paid. But according to Tomislav, there's no money in King Peter's accounts because Alexandra drained them. This is Tomislav's version of events. So these bills are left unpaid. Peter is still recovering. But by 1970, a liver transplant is suggested to King Peter, and he has to be moved from LA to Denver for this to happen. Now, again, there are very conflicting versions of what happened. Tomislav, in his memoirs, says that no permission was given. In the documentary with Mitzi Lowe, Crown Prince Alexander said there is no permission has been given. Also in the documentary is this picture of a Western Union that Mitzi has. And it's obviously it's a screenshot from a YouTube screen. So for those who can't read that, it says October 7, 70, Venice. Dr. Starzl, University of Colorado Medical Center, Colorado, in giving for permission for liver transplantation for King Peter, Queen Alexandra. So as I say, this was a screenshot from the YouTube interview that Mitzi Lowe did with the Serbian journalist. Now, The transplant apparently took place, but it didn't take. Mitzi in the documentary says it was his heart that actually gave out, and it wasn't that the liver didn't work. And tragically, poor Peter died at only 47 years old. And, you know, in my book, I do say quite clearly that I do feel very sorry for Peter. I think, you know, he was let down by a lot of people in his life. He obviously didn't make the right decisions, but, you know, tragically, 47 years old, separated from his family, from his son, from his wife, and he dies in a foreign country, and he can't be buried at home. Now, his death was announced 3 days later, and Crown Prince Alexander found out about it from a radio broadcast because he was doing military service. No, he was in the army. He was in Germany. And the broadcast said, you know, we wanted to wait because we wanted to inform his family. And Crown Prince Alexander in an interview said, you know, I'm his only son, and I found out via the radio. Next thing you know, this will is produced. And you can see on the right-hand side there, that's a barely legible signature. But this will was made in June in 1970, apparently, and it was supposed to, you know, this is while he was convalescing, and it's riddled with mistakes, and the death certificate's the same. It's, you know, as you can see, it says, I'm leaving 75% to my wife, Alexandria, and his death certificate, it's you know, it says things like he was never married and had no widow or children, but yet his widow is his inheritor, and they don't know, you know, they couldn't say who his mother was, and it's loads of mistakes. But in this will, as you can see on the right, it says that he wanted to be buried in Libertyville in Illinois, and that was where these Serbian separatists had their church. Now, there was obviously a great legal wranglings taking place, because as far as the family were aware, he was going to be buried in Windsor next to his mother. They did try to go to court to stop it legally, but it was overturned. And in the end, King Peter was buried in Liberty. As you can see there, the only member of the family to attend was the youngest brother, Andre, and he actually ended up being part of the schismatic church himself. Alexandra didn't attend, Tomislav neither did the son. There was a memorial service held in London, but I can't find any documentation or photographic evidence that Alexandra was in attendance. So after Peter's death, Alexandra lived for another 20 years, but it was another 20 years of just decline. You know, her relationship with her son broke down to the point where when he got married in 1972, she wasn't present, even though pretty much every other European royal was. She ended up having another breakdown in 1975, where she was sent to a hospital in Dublin. Her own mother died not too long after Alexandra's wedding. So Alexandra inherited her mother's house, but she couldn't afford to maintain it, so she had to sell. And she spent the rest of some of her life in Venice. I think she ended up in a nursing home, being cared for by a maid. But as I say, her mental health just was never recovered, and she ended up being moved to England. I believe Crown Prince Alexander moved his mother to a hospice in the south of England, and that's where she passed away in 1993. That was her funeral, held in London. If you can see on the left, there's her son, Greek King Constantine and Queen Anne Marie were in attendance, and so were a number of the Yugoslav royal family in the second row. Now, initially, she was buried with her mother. I don't know how Crown Prince Alexander got that happen, but Alexandra and Aspasia were buried in Tatoi in Greece. And it wasn't until 2013 that he managed to get not only his mother, but his father and his grandmother and his uncle Andre reburied in the family crypt in Serbia. And that's where she lays today, and that's the end of her very, very sad, very tragic life. So yeah, the end.
Well, thank you for that. That was really super interesting. I'd like to open the floor now to anyone who has any questions. You will have to unmute your microphone before asking, but please go ahead. Who'd like to start?
Anyone want to talk to me?
I can start. Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Samantha, for a great presentation, and I'm looking very much forward to that when you will join my program also in January. And I will also mention to everyone that I'm hosting a program. We will have about 30 events this season with different lectures about royal history. And I have written my email address in the chat in case you are interested to join us. I can do it once again to be sure. So if you are interested, please write me an email and I will add you to the mailing list. So thank you, and especially thank you, Samantha.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to don't judge the background. I can't blur it, so at least the house is tidy. I thought you might like to see my face. Hello. Ooh. Anyone else?
Well, okay. Anyone else?
Sam, thank you very much. If that was your first lecture, that was excellent.
Yes.
All I wanted to do was a drink in the middle of it. I'm so thirsty, but I have to keep going.
You did extremely well.
Oh, thank you.
It was really, really excellent. I'm so glad we did this, and I'd love to have you back to talk about something else. If you want to come and talk to us about tiaras.
Yeah, I can.
But for everyone else,
yeah,
for everyone else that's here,
I was gonna say, like, obviously, I've missed a lot out. Like, there's a lot of things in my book that I mean, we could talk about them now, but I just thought for presentation purposes, do you really want me to go into Aspasia's finances right now? Probably not.
So Sam, interesting detective work, piecing all of this together, especially after the war. But how long have you been working on this?
Okay, I've not got the greatest work ethic. I won't even lie about it. But I've also got ADHD, which doesn't help. But it took me, I'd say, probably about 2 years. Mainly because I kept like picking it up and dropping it and then picking it up and dropping it. But it's just, it's really difficult because as I said, she only wrote 2 books in her own hand. She is obviously mentioned in a lot of newspapers, but a lot of them just focus on the suicide attempts. So whenever you sort of Google her in the newspaper archives, you just 1953, 1963, Peter's death in 1970. So trying to sort of sift through anything that isn't related to those 3 events can be quite draining. The wonderful Seth, who isn't with us today, but will be watching this recording. I could not have done it without Seth because he sent me like German newspaper files that, thank God for Google Translate because I don't speak German. And he sent me, he found, so one of my, but especially in her later life, especially when it came to Peter's death and all the intrigue about that, he found a copy of Tomislav's memoirs, but they were in Serbian. So I had to download it, cut it in 2, Google Translate the 2, put it back together and go through all of that. But the best one, was the National Archives at Kew. You know, as you can all tell, I'm an amateur at this, so I didn't know what was going to be in the National Archives. So they've got a fantastic website, and you just Google, oh, you've got this on Kew, great. Doesn't really tell you what's in the folders. So I didn't really know what I was going to find there, and I didn't really expect to spend the day there. And I got there, and I got all these files, and I'm sitting down, and it's like a library, and I'm going through, and they've got her handwritten letters. And what made me really want to jump up and shout, not in a library, not allowed to do that. In her book on Prince Philip, she writes about Princess Alice being really nice to her when they were in Greece just before the war. And that Alice gave her all of her Asprey stationery because it had an A on top of it with a little crown. In these files in the National Archives was Princess Alice's stationery with Alexandra's handwritten, ink pen letters. And I was like, oh, this is so amazing. How is this accessible and no one knows it's here? It was just unreal. So it was sort of 3 years of, as I say, just trying to piece things together. I did go to the Royal Archives in Windsor, but it's difficult because you don't know what they're going to give you, and they can't give you certain things because of data protection or privacy. So they could only really give me things relating to Peter during King George VI reign. But there was good stuff in there, but you never know what's still in that archive. So who knows? Maybe second version, I could find some more stuff.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Sam. It's Klaus speaking.
Hi,
Klaus. We have been in touch, but I think you need to work on your German a bit.
No, that's what Google Translate is for.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a big fan of your book, and I really enjoyed this. And I wanted to say that here as well that you were self-publishing it. That gives you not only triple A's but 5 times A's. I have sent your book to some friends in Serbia, and that was quite interesting about the reaction from them, because they learned so much about this exile of the family, about King Peter after he left Yugoslavia, Serbia, and most of the things happening they didn't know, because Crown Prince Alexander creates an image of the royal family, which I would say the happenings of Alexandra and her husband don't really fit in properly.
It is difficult.
These link with these certain church group might be difficult as well, because the royal Serbian family keeps a close link with the Serbian church. And I think the Serbian church in exile is something different. And they more or less confirmed that and said, well, yes, it was odd. And I have actually seen the grave of Alexandra herself in Oplak, which was quite interesting. And I met as well the Crown Prince and his wife, and who is actually Greek, yeah. And there's a real intense purpose of keeping a certain image of the royal family. And your book shows a very different side. It is not just Alexandra and her husband, but as well about Queen Marie, Philip's mother, who was a bitch of first order concerning this marriage. First more or less accepting, and then afterwards saying no, and being really nasty. So the whole concept doesn't fit into these nice little royal family doing the good thing for Serbia, and suddenly it is all shown. And but I have two questions. Comments. The second suicide attempt, I didn't really understood what triggered it. When
Which one?
Crown Prince, the one when Crown Prince Alexander found his mother in the living room. What was really causing it?
No idea.
Okay.
No idea. I mean, as I say, so her book, her first suicide attempt, she's very honest about it. She says, you know, the husband's rejected her. She's at the end of her rope and everything like that. So that's in her own words. The second one, obviously, we don't get her version of events. She told the papers, I was just really depressed. And you're like, yeah, but you don't take 16 sleeping tablets, you know, like that. And then, you know, there's all these rumors that, I mean, even after they got back together, Peter was never faithful. Like, he was constantly having affairs. And then there was the issue of money, where there was one paper I read, and it was saying that Queen Frederica was going to take away Aspasia's pension, so then they were going to be really destitute, and so that might have triggered it. But again, I have no idea what did it. But
these money issues, I mean, is that royal poverty, or was that real poverty?
Because this was one of the things that
you said.
Yeah, this is one of the things that prompted me to.
They lived at the Côte d'Azur in a nice little house with staff, and that was regarded as poverty. I mean, most of us would be quite happy in a nice house with staff at the Côte d'Azur. This is what I call royal poverty.
Exactly.
Well, are we talking that, or are they so desperate that they didn't know where they get the next meal from, or is it that she couldn't buy the second dress from Chanel?
Well, this is it. Well, this is one of the things that prompted my my investigations, because it was just nothing. It didn't make sense, as you say. Like, when you don't know, like, I've been skint before. Like, I've had no money, but I can't stay at the Ritz. It's like they're talking about, oh, we lost all our money, but then we were at, the Ritz, and we were having dinner, and you're like, what? And we were, my mother had a small pension, but we had a gondola and a house in Venice with like 6 acres. And you're like, that's not poverty. What? So there's a chapter in the book where I go into where Aspasia may have got her money from.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that all the signs were there for her depression from quite early on, from the onset, of maybe what is maybe her anorexia nervosa.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone here wouldn't know that anorexia is supposed to be a condition where you're trying to control you can't control your surroundings, but you can control what you eat. And I think Alexandra had very, very little control over anything in her life.
Well, yeah, I mean, in her autobiography, it's quite clear. I mean, I don't go into detail in my book, but it's, she went to this school and she was on her own in this foreign climate, and thank God she could speak English, but she couldn't read or write it. So she couldn't communicate with any, she couldn't write to her mum. She couldn't write to Queen Sophie, who she loved. And she just never got on, and she was no good in her lessons, and she was constantly begging Aspasia to take her home. And and then poor Queen Sophie died, and that culminated in, like you say, a complete loss of control. And she's like, well, the only thing I can do to make people listen is to stop eating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, Sam. Mm-hmm. Just wanted to ask, the book that Alexandra wrote in the 1950s, the autobiography, do we know how it was received, or like sales, or just because it sounds like, from what you've described, it sounds incredibly open.
I transcribed a copy, so it is available on Amazon if anyone wants one. It's only like £5 because I want people to read it. I've never found anything like a I don't think she was on the bestseller list, so to speak.
No.
But and then some people, some of the Wikipedia actually, some people wrote really bitchy reviews that were just like, oh well, poor them, they wasted everything, and no. But there wasn't. I couldn't say there was book review in the Times on it. But it would be.
No.
I would love to know what people thought about it at the time.
I can imagine a lot of the family, extended family, would have not really approved of it.
Well, this is when you get to Prince Philip's book, it's really obvious where she stops having contact with with him especially, but also where most of the stuff she's talking about is stuff that anyone could read in the papers. So it
sounds like wasn't. Sorry, I was just going to say, wasn't it the ex-nanny Marion Crawford?
I mentioned her in my book.
Kind of thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, but also, after these books came out, not that they were ever heavily invited to royal events, but she was really she didn't go to, Prince Andrei had a number of weddings, but she didn't go to Tomislav's wedding, and they weren't allowed to go to any of the Greek things, and it was probably just a little bit like Meghan Markle. They were probably like, we should go tell everyone what goes on. So
remind me, who was it whose mother said they had a toothache, so they didn't go to the wedding? That's a very good excuse, isn't it?
Yeah. So in the Royal Archives, interestingly, in Windsor, they get engaged. Queen Marie, Peter's mother, writes to King George, because King George is Peter's godfather, and says, oh, I'm really happy, and Sandra's going to make a lovely wife, and it's all going to be great. And then all this intrigue kicks off, and then it's like on the Monday she writes to George and goes, just to let you know, I'm withdrawing my consent for this marriage. I don't approve. No. George tries to convince her, no, I think you should attend. And then she sends another saying, I absolutely refuse to attend this wedding. And then I think, she was like, I've got a toothache.
Oh, well, her loss.
Her loss.
Didn't the Queen Mother make a lot of troubles with regards to the jewels, that she didn't want to give them to the new queen?
Yep. So that's another thing that's in my book. It was so after they got married, by right, they were Alexandra's, but Queen Marie just stopped talking to them, and Peter was inquiring, and eventually he got the Chips Channon, the diarist, was very good friends with Prince Paul. Prince Paul was in exile in South Africa, or was it Kenya at the time? I think it was Kenya. And they were like, right, who legally owns these jewels? And Paul wrote back and said, in Marie's marriage contract, it says that these are property of the crown, which is now her son. And they actually ended up just, they all got in a car, went to Coutts, and took a box of jewels that were in Peter and his mother's name, and they got a locksmith to open the box, and it wasn't the emeralds, it was all this other stuff. And so they essentially held it hostage, and then Queen Marie had to get in contact, and it was just like, right, okay, fine, I'll talk to you. And they had to go to somewhere with lawyers and hand each other back their jewels. So it wasn't plain sailing. But that was all, one of the things as well is, as much as I loved Alexandra's book, one of the things that also prompted further research was the fact that sometimes her version of events wasn't exactly what, didn't tally with reality. So she made no mention of that in her book. She just went, and we met up in the lawyer's office, and you're like, oh, really? Because Chips Channons is saying you essentially stole it.
You said that it took you 2 years to write the book, as if that was a very long time, but I think that's amazing. Well done. Things take way longer than that sometimes. I've had things which have been ongoing for years and years and never managed to finish yet. So that congratulations, that is really good.
Thank you. I thought I was being extra lazy.
Absolutely not. No, definitely not.
Thank you.
I think it's sort of like the irony that the only time she ever set foot in Serbia was when she was dead as well.
It's when she was dead, and then there was this brief. The train stopped between Italy and Greece when they were during the war. And interesting, it was really funny. She could have met Peter on this train, but he didn't want to meet any of his extended family. So they sent everyone's called Alexander. The son of Prince Paul, who was Prince Alexander, went to meet her. And apparently he went back to his cousin, King Peter, and, oh, you know, she's really pretty. And Peter supposed to have said, oh, she's bound to be ugly then if you like her.
Yeah.
Did you try to contact Crown Prince Alexander when you were doing your research for the book?
I did. He was the first person I contacted. He, you know, he was, you know, her only child, and he, thankfully still alive. But so I emailed, and everything went via his court. So I emailed and said, first of all, you know, hi, I'm going to do this book. I'd love to, obviously, I'd love to have your cooperation. If you could provide me with, you know, memories of your mother, no. And, you know, got a response, and it said, oh, you know, Crown Prince Alexander's very excited. You know, this is great, not great. And that's when I started to do more and more research. And that's when I started to notice that certain things weren't adding up. You know, as I said, with the jewels and other things that was being said in the book, actually in the newspapers, was completely different. And I had this awful thought. I thought, oh no, what if she was a fantasist? Like, bless her. Like, but what if that was part of her disorder? And I had to write the email, and it was coming up to Christmas, and obviously Crown Princess Alexandra hadn't been very well. So I thought, you don't really want this at this time of year. So I wrote in the new year, and I said, look, I'm as respectfully as I could. I said, what was your mother's condition? And I hope you don't think I'm trying to be sensationalist. I hope you don't trying to think I'm, you know, trying to, you know, make a big deal out of it or poke fun or anything like that. And I didn't get a response. And then I tried to follow up, and I just got an email saying the Crown Prince doesn't want to talk about it. And I thought, you know, that's fine. I said, Mum, it's a very difficult, sensitive topic. And I hope, you know, I hope people who have read my book, I've not tried to serialize it or, you know, celebritize it or anything like that. It's just, you know, the woman wasn't well, and it was kind of like, well, I can't really write about her daring do's because she didn't have any. It's mainly about her health, so I have to write about it. Sorry, I can't ignore it.
Sure, yes.
But no, so I know that they know it exists, this book. Whether they've read it, I don't know. But it would be nice. Again, in the beginning of my book, I've said, you know, if in the future they want to get in contact and collaborate, and because that was one thing I did feel that was missing with my book, and I was really annoyed that I couldn't really find a lot of like personal, like human details about Alexandra, like you know, one friend of mine, David, who runs Spanish Royal Jewels on Instagram, he managed to find like the one and only clip I've ever heard of her speaking, because I've never heard, apart from that one clip, never heard what her voice sounded like. I didn't know what her favorite color was. You know, who was her favorite musician? You know, did she like Elvis because he was around? Like, I didn't have any of that. So, as I say, in the future, if they did want to help with a revised version, I would love to put little snippets like that in, but yeah, that's balls in their court.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Scathing reviews?
No.
Just a quick one. Are you going to stay with her? I suppose you found out, as you say, as much as you can. Who next takes your interest, or is that a secret?
No. Do you know what? People are very kind, but they keep asking me, "What's your next book?" I'm like, I'm surprised I wrote this one. Like, I have no idea. I do like sort of minor, forgotten royals, and I think. Like, who else would I do? Again, I think one of the reasons Alexandra just interested me is because she was so lost. Just like, she was a queen, but no one knew anything about her. So I don't know if anyone would pique my interest in the same way that she did.
What about doing her mother-in-law? What about Queen Mary?
I mean, I don't. I mean, we're trying to keep on the right side of the Serbian royal family, so I won't. Even though it was in the Daily Mail, like we all know she was a lesbian. Come on. But I mean, I don't. You know, Peter's brother Tomislav. I loved his memoirs, and I'd love to do something on him and his life in exile, because he did so much for the Serbian community, and he was also very involved in the royal web of Europe in the way that his brother and Alexandra weren't. So he would be very interesting to do. The younger brother as well was just like he was scandalous, so that would be funny to do. But no, nothing in the pipeline at the moment. So, but as I said, I would love to do. My absolute goal would be to find Mitzi Lowe's paperwork, but I think that was burnt when she died. Because I'd love to get to the bottom of what happened there. But who knows?
Where was she from?
She was Serbian. She was Serbian, born in Serbia, but she obviously fled after the war as well. And she had one marriage in Serbia, and then she married a Chinese doctor in America, and then she got with Prince Andrei, 1974. Yeah.
I ask because Mitzi Lowe sounds like she could have been from down the road in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so the second husband was Lowe. I mean, her actual name is something very Serbian. I could look it up, but I'll mangle it. But yeah, like so to get her version of events, there's, as I say, there's this one, and I'm happy to send it to people. There's this one interview she did, but the whole interview, she's got her back to the camera like that. And I think she was saying that, you know, she was getting a lot of threats because, you know, obviously the politics of, you know, the Balkans are very, you know, can be very sinister sometimes. But she didn't want to show her face, and she would only talk to this one journalist. And I did contact this journalist, but like a lot of people, the initial inquiry, oh yeah, great, we'll help, and then she just fell off. So her version of events and everyone else's version of events are very, you know. So yeah, if anyone knows where she's, you know, her stuff is, do let me know.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything at all? Here's your chance. You've got the author right in front of you. Okay. I would like to, in ending this, not just thank Sam for being with us, but hoping she will be with us again, both as attending lectures and giving them, because I found this to be really riveting. It was really excellent. Thanks again, Sam, for being with us. I'd like to apologize for anybody's sound quality if they're having any troubles like I am with a little bit of an echo. My voice is coming back at me, so anyway, hopefully that will not be in the recording. My only excuse is we're way far out here in the country, and sometimes our connectivity isn't great. But I'm going to do my best each time to try and improve what I can. Let's see. I have left my email address in the messages if anybody wants a link to the recording that we've made here. And I would like to second Martin's mentioning of his group. He has a wider interest base than we do here, where we concentrate on Romanov and Romanov adjacent topics. He has a much wider subject base, and I would encourage you to contact him and get on his mailing list, because some of his presentations are really excellent and shouldn't be missed. And finally, on the subject of Martin, he is our September presenter. So I'd like to have him just say a few words about what he's going to be doing before we wrap this up. Martin?
Thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm hosting a program which I have written about in the chat. I also have a very Swedish program I having together with a school in Sweden, actually. And I heard a question was raised about the lecture about Queen Maria of Yugoslavia. And actually, in the Swedish program, I have this speaker for this lecture, and maybe I can convince this lady to have it also in English at some time, which should not be impossible because she had English lectures in the past. Anyway, in September, I will give you some information about the connections between the Romanov women and the houses of Mecklenburg-Schwerin and Württemberg. I have been in the past made a number of lectures about German royal houses. So I will tell you a little bit about the ladies who married into the houses of Mecklenburg-Schwerin and Württemberg next time we will meet in this group.
Okay, well, I'm sure we will look forward to that. We'll be putting up notifications on all the usual places. Our Facebook groups will be starting back up very shortly. What was once the King and Wilson Instagram, but will now be the Atlantis Instagram. And once again, thank you, Sam, so much. I hope after the initial scramble that we were pretty user-friendly for you.
Oh, yeah. There's always teething problems. It's good.
Okay. Zoom surprises me every month. Okay, so again, thank you everyone for being here. And I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Janet, can you hang around a second?